a minute. There we go. Right, so I'm recording this so that I can put it on the group and people can watch it, because I know that you've got loads of fascinating, interesting stuff to say. We have one of our lovely viewers who said, I'm looking forward to this. Well, you've got us to yourselves tonight, so settle back, open the popcorn, because we're off, aren't we, Christine? So for those of you who don't know, I'm Sally Brockway. Christine is Christine Challand, and we work together many years ago on a newspaper called Today, which was Britain's first colour newspaper. We were on the features desk, which is very exciting, wasn't it, Christine? And we're here tonight to talk to you about what journalists want when you pitch them, because I know that all the people in my group, the people that follow me, are people that want to achieve media coverage. They may not have the budgets for big PR agencies. And it's the Wild West out there, isn't it? Because you don't know what journalists want, you don't know what they're thinking. And most of the people doing my course are actually a little bit nervous of journalists. They think we're sort of, sitting there sharpening our sort of Freddy Krueger fingernails, which isn't true, is it, Christine?
It is true, of course. I just was thinking tonight, about people who think that, this is why the beauty of being in PR is perhaps to have some command of journalism, because we are, in PR, what terms we're sort of poachers turned gamekeepers, and I think that's why we're good at what we do, because we can see the problems coming over the hill, and invariably that's the only time that there is a PR kind of inquest. What went wrong? Why didn't we get in the paper? Why didn't you get us out there? So you need to have the answers. And again, I'm just thinking of a time where I went into Lakeland, the gadget shop, where you go in as a hormonal middle-aged woman thinking that you don't need any of it, and come out with a bag bulging with lemon squeezers and pip reducers and cherry stone, imbibers. And there was a whole team of PR people firewalling me, I suppose. I was sent in because they hadn't posted their finances. So the idea was that I would go in and find out, just what sort of profits Lakeland was making, and the secret of their success. Hugely successful company. And one of the first things that happened, despite the row of some probably 3 or 4 PR people, comms, I went into their, it's now closed actually. They had a head office in Cumberland, in the Lake District, and it was an astonishing sight to see people who would normally be scaling Snowdon or climbing a mountain, all queuing at 8 o'clock, clutching bags of Kendall's mint cake because they wanted to get into Lakeland. And I saw a chap go in there with what looked like the debris of an ironing board cover. And I saw him. I'd introduced myself to the PR. They said, well, just wait here. We'll take you through to meet the directors. And I realised very quickly that this chap who was pursuing one of the sales assistant in the flagship store, carrying a burned out ironing board cover, was in fact one of the directors. And I said to him, God, you really look as though you need some help. What have you, a small domestic blaze in the kitchen this morning? And he said, yeah, I need an ironing board cover. And I said, well, I'm here to interview directors. And he said, well, I'm one of them. Yes, and shook my hand warmly. So ethically, I wasn't doing anything wrong. And that's the downside, I suppose, if you're a comms person, because I think we are all out to get a story. And you as PR people are out to get a story as well. Maybe it's not quite the same one that you envisaged appearing in the paper. And he said, I said, God, you must be the most eligible man in Cumbria if you're a director of Lakeland. And he said, yes. He said, obviously, I'm divorced. And I said, no, I didn't actually know. He said, yeah, that's why this morning I was almost set fire to my ironing board, and I'm looking for an ironing board cover. And I said, well, why bother? I said, why not just get the shirts taken out? He said, well, I've got a date tonight. I've got a blind date. And he said, I'm actually really not looking forward to it. I don't really need a woman in my life. So of course I'm absorbing all this. And I said, well, what are you looking for in a woman? He said, just somebody who doesn't answer back, somebody who just, keeps their mouth shut and lets me do what I like. I said, presumably that's why you're divorced in the first place. So we were chatting. And this all then was really when I actually got round to looking around the back halls of Lakeland, which was deeply interesting, and you could see the secret of their success. They recruited their merchandising and sort of salespeople from other retail outlets, John Lewis and Marks and Spencer's, and they were very personal touches. They connected with their customers. But of course, the headline was the Mail on Sunday, lifts the hermetically sealed lid on Lakeland's director's love life. Because he had told me that he was going on a blind date. He wasn't really bothered. He was obviously just looking, not particularly interested that night in going on a blind date. And they never said anything. They never came after us because everything I'd said, I'd introduced myself as a journalist. Whether they laugh, I don't think they probably did, but it took away. So what I was going to start with saying that you can never really gauge however many people you man up with, what the prerogative or the kind of mission of a journalist will be. And that's why journalistic backgrounds means that you are honouring among thieves, effectively. We know what we're looking for. We're dangerous as a breed.
But we're not, though, Christine, really. because the people that are listening to us now, they're people that run businesses. They're mostly females. There are lots of women that's starting again. They're very talented. They're experts. They've got things to say. So they need media coverage. And they want to avoid what the Lakeland guy did because, I have this same problem. I say to people, what you say to a journalist is taken down. So only say things that you're happy to see in print, but don't say anything you don't want to see in print. And I had this recently with the women's cricket match. They'd got someone from Big Brother from years ago to open the women's cricket season. And I'd set up all these interviews. They wanted to be in this magazine and that magazine. So I said, you're going to have to talk about cricket for a bit, but they will want to talk about your personal life. This TV star, and I wasn't even in on the interview. Some young assistant had sat in on the interview and not realised what was going on. She started talking about her sex life. So when the headline was my sex therapy sessions, the agency that hired me went completely mental. Okay, well, why on earth has this happened? And I said, well, I don't know. Why is your celebrity talking about their sex life? This kind of thing happens. These people take their eye off the ball. You come along, you're very friendly. It's very easy to talk to you. They run their mouths off, and then there's a bad headline. So what I'm saying to people is, remember that everything you say to a journalist can be taken down and used, but so rather than them fishing about and finding something slightly scurrilous, think about it beforehand and come up with a story. Give them a story hook. Give them an angle. Have something interesting to say. Because I think if someone comes to us and they say, I had a woman the other day, she's a health coach. And I'm like, why are you a health coach? And she'd had to quit her job because her perimenopausal symptoms were so bad. I said, how bad were they? She said, I thought I had dementia. And suddenly it's getting interesting because as you dig beneath the surface, you start to find out more details. And that's what I mean by a story hook. Do you find, Christine, that lots of people pitching their stories fail to grasp this concept of they need a hook or an angle?
I think so. I think they get the idea. I mean, it's that old adage where if you fail to prepare, then you can prepare to fail. And I think if you don't know your onions and you go into, even if you don't know your target audience, even if you don't know who a features editor is or who a lifestyle editor is, then you make life so much harder for yourself in the first instance. And I think journalists don't have time. You said to me the other day, nobody picks up a phone. They just want instant gratification. And so your approach should be, in the first instance, those journalistic ideas of KISS, keep it short and simple. We all learn that when we start out on journalism. And brevity is the key. Less is more. And you could say that too with lipstick, vodka, all of those things. You've got to really anticipate that people don't have the time to talk to you. And if they do, they probably will say, just email it to me. So the dark art of PR, I think, is being able to write a succinct piece of clean copy, bullet points, as Sally says in her HITS idea, that acronym that you use. I just wrote it down somewhere. HIT, what was that for?
Headline, image, target.
Indeed, those things where you're looking at your headline, and often a good way of looking at it, if you're selling into the women's magazine market, not the glosses, but I'm talking Chat, Bella, Best, then if you look at the cover lines, my breasts exploded at 50,000 feet. I slept with my brother's boyfriend's wife's dog sitter. They are succinct, and although they might seem ludicrously simple, that's what journalists want. Some journalists are probably 12 years old and have come in as a Nepo baby to a desk somewhere. So they don't have the gravitas or the experience really to see what could happen to a story if it's given a chance. So you have to set out your stall with as much clarity and authority as you can in the first instance. That would be my first tip. That idea of hit, headline. What was that again? I wrote it somewhere. Headline. I've just written it down somewhere. Where the hell is it?
Headline, image, target. So the headline is the summing your story up in a single sentence, because that is it. If your story can't be summed up in a single sentence, there's a problem. You know what I mean? You can't be waffling on. It's that single. If you're in an elevator, you're going down one floor, what is that sentence that you're going to capture someone's attention? So I always say to people, if you can't boil it down to that single sentence, need to think again, because that's your 2 seconds to sell it in. That's a journalist scrolling. I spoke to my friend who gets thousands of emails. She said, I literally look at them for 2 seconds. And if the subject's boring, I go on. So your subject header has literally got to say what the story is. And I think my most successful subject header ever was Diet Coke could kill me. And I knew that I sent that off. 5 minutes later, the phone rang, and I'm like, and it's the Daily Mail Health Desk. Do you know what I mean? So I just knew that that's the sort of headline they're looking for. People might be thinking, yeah, but my story isn't sensational. It doesn't have to be sensational. This is what people think. Oh, but I didn't have my foot chewed off by an alligator, and my breast didn't explode. And do you know what I mean? I didn't. You may not have a sensation, but it's about finding that single sentence. And I saw a great story the other day in the Telegraph, actually, and it was a woman that had lost weight. That was in its simplest form, a woman had lost some weight. But the headline was, I tried 20 fad diets until I found the one that made me lose 5 stone. And it was the fact that I tried 20 fad diets. It was a great headline because it caught my attention. So it's a woman losing weight. So how do we put that in a sentence that sounds enticing and exciting? And you might have to play around with it. And I kind of think, Christine, that the best way, because we can do this in our sleep. I dream in headlines, and it's very easy for us. We've been doing it for 40 years. But I think if you're new, you get the magazine you want to be in and you look at the headlines, because I think that's the best place to start. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. Because, unless you know your target, you don't really know. You're going to look and write Egypt if you're going after somewhere that you don't have an idea of who the audience are and what they like. And it's very quickly, you've only got to buy 3 editions of the magazine or online subscribe and have a look and see the kind of stuff they're coming up with to understand that it's not rocket science. And I think there are a lot of people who just undervalue or don't quite realize the expedience of using a woman's magazine in lifestyle, where perhaps a broadsheet or a tabloid, a mid tabloid probably doesn't have the room because it's full of royal stories and celebrity stories and crime and politics, and particularly what's going on with geopolitics at the moment. Your jobs are probably 3 or 4 times as hard as they were when Sally and I started out because there was space. But that does not mean that you can't get stuff, out there, because people are looking for content. The contracting newsrooms, you've got young journalists who are all on sort of threepence halfpenny a shift, who need content all the time. So there's no reason why you can't revisit old stories if they haven't made the first time around. There's no such thing as probably an original story, an old chestnut. We've got seasonal stories, whether it's school uniform time, whether it's Halloween treats, whether it's, getting that beach body. You can look at content that you might have had 2 or 3 years ago and just put a different spin on it, because there's no such thing, I don't think, and you see it all the time, as originality. So don't be thinking that you've got to have something, absolutely amazing, because it can be very matter of fact. The other aspect of this is that you've got to make sure it's got authority. So, I would say that, but basically, once you've looked at your audience, you need to look at, what what the content is. Don't put stuff out there. Don't send stuff at midnight on an email to an unknown email address where you don't have the name. Don't put Dear Christine, because the editors might change. They change all the time. Or if it goes to somebody's personal thing, it's far better to send it to the secretary, the news desk secretary or the features secretary, or somebody, if you don't know that person, and it's unlikely that you do. I do shifts for the Sun on a Saturday for features, and it's going to be another freelance next Saturday. So, don't be fooled by a generic email, and certainly don't send stuff out into the ether when everybody's asleep, because it's just going to go straight through to file 13. So being responsible for that and researching your stuff is an absolute key to making sure that your stuff gets noticed, and not sending stuff out all the time. Don't be a moaning Minnie. Don't keep sending stuff out which has no substance and which you've tried. And also another thing that I think PRs quite forget is that one of the best ways to get stuff out and in is by offering some level of exclusivity. So if you're sending a round robin, you don't send it to all 5 features editors, because hey, they all talk to each other, they all lunch together, they all know what they're doing. So don't think that you can outfox a seasoned journalist, because they all talk, they all see the same thing. And if you become one of those people that just puts out shite, you're going to get a poor reputation for trying to offload stuff. And that's one of the most, well, the biggest, as I can see, as a cardinal sin. Exclusivity is great. If somebody thinks midweek, not on deadline, not on Friday, but where there's time to consider something, when they go into conference on a Tuesday, if it's a Sunday paper, or not on deadline, not expecting an answer, then you're offering something which they've got to themselves. That's a really key aspect, I think, of pitching.
Can you explain a bit about in conference? Because people don't know how newspapers work. What does conference mean, and when does it happen?
Well, it happens, throughout the day. They're having several conferences a day to make sure that whatever ideas have come in, breaking news stories, what's the schedule for the day? What stories are likely to be developing, or what are likely to be stories that are going to unfold during the day. And that means that somebody might have promised you a slot for something and then you lose it. There's no point in emailing or texting somebody and saying, what about my story? It's just the way it is. In the same way that when you're interviewing someone, say it's a dispute between 2 farmers over a hedge, then you can't guarantee that their story is going to go in the paper. It's about space, and again, it's about timing. So conferences are where a picture editor, a news editor, a foreign affairs person, a specialist journalist, a political editor will all get together and say, these are my pitches. They're pitching in the same way that you are, really. And depending on the interest in the story, that's how a schedule is worked out. Often it's on day. If a newspaper sees something they like in another paper, there is no honor among thieves. They will take that story and develop it for themselves, and sometimes those ideas can be thrashed out in the morning. If say, I don't know, the Sun or the Mirror has seen something they quite like in the Telegraph or the Times, and it's I suppose the broadsheet, the old-fashioned broadsheet in terms of their size, do have really good buried stories that don't get the same headlines or the same kind of exposure that a tabloid would give it. So again, that's a way. If you've tried a tabloid, then go to a broadsheet. Put it online. Another great way of getting your stories picked up is by doing it in social media. I saw a great one today. I mean, it wasn't good for the hotel involved, but a woman, and I'm half wondering whether maybe a news agency might have been involved, and I'll come on to that in a while. But something that goes on TikTok, they have got journalists round the clock looking at social media accounts, and you'll see there's no real depth or even accuracy, which is another cardinal sin. They've just taken something that's happened, like a proposal on an ice skating rink in Russia. We don't know when it happened, who it happened, or where it happened, but if it's quirky and somebody's gone underwater or gone through an ice fishing hole in a tutu, then it makes. So putting your stuff out on social media to capture initial attention, or what is a very useful point is to use a news agency. News agencies, and we've got two on our patch where I am in the Midlands. We've got Cater's News Agency and Southwest News. You've got North News and Pictures. You've got Cavendish up in Manchester.
I use PA a lot, PA News.
PA News, again, they've got a whole features arm as well. So there should never be a quiet day on an agency. And again, I've worked as an agency journalist. We were during Wimbledon. We would do two of Molly Badham's chimpanzees at Twycross Zoo. If it was quiet and Wimbledon was on, up we would go with two pairs of frilly knickers and a couple of tennis rackets and get a couple of the chimpanzees playing. So again, you've talked about this, Sally, about coming up with stunts when it's quiet. And I think we did, God, when I was with News Team, which then went over and was sold to Southwest, we were always doing things like this, perhaps a little close to the wire, something like putting a big sheet up over a motorway bridge saying, "I love you, Derek," under cover of darkness, obviously, and then the next day spinning it up as a story. I'm not suggesting for one moment that you make up news, but there are ways of getting your stories in, particularly on a quiet day, particularly during the summer months when things are quiet, but also always making sure that you know what you're selling, that you're offering something which has detail and offering something, with exclusivity lashed onto it. I think that's a key.
Going back to social media, that was interesting because I met a really lovely influencer in the summer at a Seconda watch event, and she was called Monica. She's 30, very attractive, and her account is all about secondhand clothes shopping. She always looks fabulous. And she's really passionate about what she does. And she said to me, the Sun steal all my stories. And the Sun literally, they go onto her Instagram account, they take her pictures and they slap it in the newspaper with a bit of editorial. She's in there all the time. She now invoices them and they pay her. What I'm saying is, if what you do is really great content on social media, there's every chance that a newspaper will come along and lift it and put it in their newspaper. And so she's getting, not only is she getting paid, she's getting great PR, because you're right, Christine, the journalists are all over social media. They want to know what's trending on TikTok. They want to know who's on Snapchat. They're young people, clearly younger than you and I, but they're sifting through, because journalists are looking everywhere for stories. So don't be, thinking, oh, my social media, it doesn't matter, because if it's really good, then that can get you some press coverage. And I was also going to talk about online, because when we were journalists on Today, Christine, the story had to be really quite good to get into the newspaper. But with online, there is more space. And I've seen stories particularly on the Express. There was one, I tried this cupcake recipe on TikTok and here's what happened. And there's a whole feature about someone putting some flour, milk, eggs and sugar in a mug and making a cake. There are reams of those features. So I say to people, look at them, read them, and think, can you come up with your own version? I saw a great one. It was by some brain doctor saying, I'm a brain doctor, and here's the 5 things I would never do for my health. So there are really quirky, interesting ways of getting your expertise online in ways that wouldn't make a newspaper. You wouldn't get, I've made a cupcake in a newspaper, would you? But you would get it online. So I think the rules have changed. I would say in some ways it's a little easier, but you still need to be creative and original.
I think you have to be authoritative as well. I think that's one of if I'm doing sort of acronyms, I would take that from my ARSE acronym, which to start with is audience, obviously, and avoid unattributed opinion, research in the word ARSE, and responsibility. So, papers love lists, they love polls, they love academic research, they love data, which then authorizes your story. And I think maybe a lot of PRs forget that. I mean, for example, if you're sort of selling gym membership, then you produce research which shows that perhaps people who go to a gym 2 days a week are less likely to have as many days off work as those who don't. And it's literally little things, coming up with things like that with your client. I mean, your client knows the market probably a lot better than you do. What you're doing is showing your client how to sell it in. So it's things like that. An academic, you phone up any of the universities and they've all got subject lists. Like, for example, we at university have Professor God, Darren Aldridge, who is a professor of the mystic and witchcraft and devil, devil worship. At this time of year, he would be perfect to have a platform talking about why we celebrate Halloween. It's an old chestnut, but it works. So if any of you are in-house PRing or you know colleagues, again, talking to each other is a good one. Don't be one of those people who put your hand over your results while you're looking at them. Share, because what you've got, you might find that somebody else has got a contact that you might not have thought about. And it also is a way of actually, I think, going after new contacts for business. I used to, when I was, freelance and I did PR with a colleague, we used to look at stories, and hospitals are great ones. Hospitals and charities who are so at the end of the pecking order because of the climate and austerity, and a lot of the, they are completely armed with PR people who earn a lot of money, but just don't see. It seems to me they're so busy dealing with frontline crisis and just churning out regular stuff about waiting times and that kind of thing. Whereas if you ask, could I come in and perhaps, and I did this at the Children's Hospital in Birmingham, coming in and talking to some of the PRs about what kind of fantastic operations are being done here. And again, you've got medical correspondents who are, medical and health and lifestyle are probably the most beleaguered bunch of journalists in the whole of Christendom. So they will always look for something. And I think if you can lend authority and you can keep people on side, that's another real key ethical aspect of PR, is if you're going to sell someone in who's had a, I don't know, a Brazilian booty lift or something, and it was a complete disaster. You can't sell that person in with their details if they're mentally ill, if they're a bit flaky, and excuse me, they don't really want to do it once they've spoken to a journalist. So it's the integrity of keeping people on side and also making sure that the authority or the charity or the body that you're dealing with knows where you're intending to place this. And until you've had a look round and come up with ideas, I remember this amazing story about a baby who'd had heart surgery. This is a few years ago, and I got chatting to this cardiac surgeon. And I said, my God, that's such a responsible, amazing job. And, how big was the baby's heart? And he said, well, if you can think about it, the size of my thumbnail. And it turned out that this little baby was George Davis, Georgia Astor, the great, extraordinary businessman, and it was his granddaughter. So we asked permission for him to feature his daughter. She's now, probably 20. And just dealing something like that, where this heart surgeon has said, I worked on a heart as big as my thumbnail. It's like Sally says, look for the headline, but look for the opportunities, because in-house PRs often don't see them. They get fogged by the usual churning stuff that they have to put out.
I would say, and I mean, some of my, the students and clients are solo business people. They haven't got a PR. It's just them and something, and they're so sort of wrapped up in their own business they can't see the wood for the tree. So I would say, have a chat with one of your friends. Talk about you. It's You're right. Conversation leads to ideas. Brainstorming. If you're sitting in an office on your own, I can't think of a story. You'll never think of a story, because what we do is I work freelance for some PR agencies. We all get together, might be on a Zoom, and we talk, we throw in ideas. It doesn't matter if your idea is mad or crazy or ridiculous. And then something always comes from that. So I would say if you're on your own, meet up with your friends, brainstorm, write notes, because sometimes it's that creative part of your brain I think you have to use in PR. It's not just, this is my business, I need a story. You need to kind of mine that creativity and spark it off. And it's conversation that does that. I mean, as a journalist, I'm always finding stories when I'm not meaning to find stories. I'm at a wedding talking to someone. I'm like, that's a good story. I went to a wedding on Thursday. There were about 4 fabulous stories. I was like, blimey, there's so much going on here, because people think their lives are very boring, but they're not. It's just that you don't recognize what's interesting because it's your life. So get someone else to chat to you and they'll say, that's really interesting what you just told me there about when you grew up on, I don't know, on a pig farm. And now, now you're whatever. It's about talking to people, the detail, and you're not going to get that sitting on your own in a room, are you, Christine? Or are
Yeah,
you?
exactly. No, I think that the other thing is that sometimes things just don't work. And you can beat your head up against a brick wall and and a client will have different expectations. And again, that's one of my, you know, ARS acronym, capital
You
letters.
just wanted to say the word arse a few times, didn't you?
I just feel that sometimes you have to have your integrity, or the client's integrity should perhaps come before the urgency to get coverage. If it's just about getting an aggregate company or a health product company's name in the paper, that surely is not as important as having the kind of command with journalists of being someone who is going to sell something in that's worth looking at. And that's a big thing. Often people will constantly send out a whole diatribe of stuff, and it's really not worth looking at. And you can see somebody's really tried to just earn their PR, allowance for the month. So sometimes you have to lower a client's expectation. If it's a dry, fusty old firm of accountants, in Stornoway, then chances are it'll make the Stornoway Bugle, but it's not going to make the finance pages of the Daily Telegraph. And again, I think there's a fear. You have the Michelin star in PR, whereas your client has a Michelin star in whatever profession they're in. And I think this is another problem I've found with people where, you can't get companies or perhaps government bodies, particularly where there's a lot of protocol, to listen to you as a public relations person. And that's key, because you can go in and pitch for work, but you can say, look, you're only as good as the stuff you send out. I'm not going to spin it. If you get a reputation as a PR spin merchant, you're going nowhere. You're not, you're dumbing down your integrity. And I think if you're clear and you're transparent with people, that's when you build your reputation as a PR person.
And talking about sort of, some of the people we're talking to here, or the clients I'm talking to, I mean, they're not big organizations, they're not, big celebrities, they're just ordinary people. And they often say to me, but what have I got to say? Or I'm not an expert enough. And I say there is room for everyone. I don't know, we haven't talked about journalist requests, but that's something I say to people. If you're going to do anything, go onto X every day, type in hashtag journo request, and find out what journalists are looking for, because they're all looking to speak to someone. If it's about sleep, it's about the menopause, it's about sustainable Christmas gifts, it's about which hotels to stay in Torbay, whatever it is. There's a whole load of journalists looking for stories. So if you find all this kind of creativity and spinning and surveys and statistics all a bit scary, you can always start on that level. So if you're a credible expert and you pitch properly, in that if someone is saying, I'm doing an article about wardrobes, don't send them your press release about kitchen sinks. If you give someone, I find when I teach people how to do this, if they approach journalists in a professional way, but the really succinct pitch saying, I understand you want to talk to someone about wardrobes, I'm Birmingham's biggest wardrobe expert, and here's what I can talk about, bullet point, bullet point, bullet point, here's my images on a link. That's a great way to get coverage, because there's more and more of that journo request stuff going on X. So, I mean, is that something you ever deal with, Christine?
So I think really, even when I did PR, I find that I almost saw it like a game. If you were going to come up with stuff, and I've dealt with even refrigerated logistics, for God's sake. I mean, that's not exactly a swinging, sexy idea, but the idea is that you're going to get it in some way. And again, I think don't overlook the client, because it's actually by going into the company and speaking from everyone to the CEO to the cleaner, if you can get that kind of access, because they are they're just as important in terms of PRing their company as you are looking after them. And for me, I think there's always a way of finding a thing. And also, you've got someone like Sally, and I've looked at what Sally did, what Sally is doing with this group, and she's incredibly experienced. And what she says, what I've looked at, is absolutely not rocket science, but it's so obvious you wouldn't know it because we have been journalists for such a long time. Like Sally said the other day, when dinosaurs roamed the earth, and I don't think you should be frightened of journalists because we are jacks of all trade and masters of nothing. We're told to go and interview someone, and we perhaps don't know the first thing about like heart surgery. So you're in the same thing. But again, if you can aim to just be as concise, transparent, clear, simple when you're pitching, that's all you need, because a story is a story is a story. It's just actually making sure you can get through to the right person. That's one of the things I find. I mean, I'm commissioned a lot, but when I go through to someone, I don't sell very well. I make a complete hash of it all because I'm nervous. And I'm an old big mama, and they would know that if I'm phoning them with a story about, I don't know, some legacy that Stephen Hawking has left, they're going to know that what I'm talking about isn't just a load of old bollocks, and I'm not being paid it. I just think it's an interesting story. So if you just deal with people like an ordinary friend, and then if you really don't know what to do, you could always have my email. I'd give you my 10 pence, and I know Sally would. You're part of that. But the key is trying to get alongside as many journalists as you can, and not thinking that all your stuff has to be at national level. If you get something in a regional or on a regional radio station, or a regional news magazine program, you are still going to get this picked up. Everything gets picked up everywhere. Somebody gave me a story about I don't know, vandalism of a clock face in Lampeter in Wales. Well, it's difficult to get stuff in from Wales when you're selling into an English paper, but it will get picked up by Dragon News, for example, and then the agencies in those areas ring them. Cut out the middleman. And look at getting your stuff publicised regionally, because it will get hoovered up by agencies. And if it doesn't, then you phone the agency and say, well, I've put this story out to the Bournemouth Echo. Do you think it might have the legs to go national?
And there's also, don't forget that some of the big news outlets now, they own a load of, like Reach PLC that owns the Mirror, the Express, the Star, OK, New Magazine. They also now own all the locals. So when I was doing PR for Weight Watchers, I was going to say Waitrose then, chance to be a fine thing. I'm more of a little girl. But when I was doing the PR for Weight Watchers, I had this young woman who'd lost 8 stone, it was. And I got that away in My London. And because they're the same group as Reach, someone from the Mirror thought, I'll have that. So it ends up in the Daily Mirror. So the local papers are a pipeline to the nationals. If the story's good and it's been in the locals, the nationals will take it.
And they syndicate. It's because of the ownership. So Reach PLC, if a story appears in the Birmingham Mail, it goes straight through to the Mirror Group and it goes outside. So there is always that. And also teasing up the same press release or the same idea or the same social media put out for local radio. I mean, I know local radio is, contracting like most things, or local Look North and Look South and Look Northeast. They all need funnies. They all need little and finalies and that kind of thing. So don't overlook newsrooms that are looking after broadcast outlets, because they're just as vital, because they're you've got to come up with some good interactive images if you're going to sell a story and it's some dog that's had its back leg wheels put on instead or something. You've got to come up with some images, so it's slightly different looking for broadcast content. But I think there's so much you can go for, and again, that's actually knowing your area again, but not being frightened of it, because you know more than the journalist, which is gorgeous, really.
I always say, if you can, I had someone today talking about a retreat. She was running for a day, and she said, I've got a couple of spare places. Well, I said, well, invite a journalist along, because I always say, get to know your local journalists. If you've got a restaurant, get them in, give them a meal. Do you know what I mean? It's really worthwhile. I did some PR for a little bakery around the corner, tiny bakery. It was a very small job. They had some baking courses. I phoned up a local magazine and said, look, you've got a young child, why don't you come and do this cookie baking course? And, you know, I didn't say you better write something about it, but the woman came along, fantastic afternoon with her son, was about 5 years old, and then she gave us half a page in the magazine. It's really simple. I was just doing it really just to get to know her. She came along, she was treated nicely, she had a great time, she had a lot of fun. She goes away and thinks, well, they were nice, I'm going to write about this. So it's about building relationships, isn't it? And the local news reporters is a really good place to start. And I always find that getting stuff in local radio, for example, even the BBC local radio stations, is much easier than getting something on, you know, Woman's Hour, one of the national shows. And then, as I said, there's always a chance it can get picked up. But it's kind of almost easier to deal with reporters on a local level. They're a bit more laid back. They've got a little bit more time for you because just the very fact that you live in that local area. I remember we had a Weight Watchers story about a woman that had lost lots and lots of weight and become a pole dancer, and we did that one locally, and the locals loved it. And then that was one of those stories that went local and got picked up and ended up somewhere else, and it just ran and ran. So always look to your local press, get to know them, find out who the reporters are, and if you've got an event, invite them along, because mostly journalists like to be invited along, don't they? We like to get out and do stuff.
Well, particularly if it's free, I think that's key. I mean, that it used to be, what something that everybody did, or, God, I remember, on features desks where there'd be like witches going through bags of samples. Don't forget that bribery and corruption does still work with some journalists. It's difficult to get journalists to come out of that because I've got youngsters who have left university now, gone into jobs and found it really quite depressing that they're writing, say, 100 stories a day and not going anywhere and not doing anything on the phone. That journalism has changed so much. So there's a lot of armchair journalism and a lot of kind of, sofa surfing press releases, which if you write them well enough, it's very difficult to see the difference between the finished product and what appears in the paper. So again, if you're good and you do keep it short and sweet and you don't do pages and pages of stuff, then it will go in, it will just fly in unchanged. You might be disappointed if you don't get the name of the bathroom manufacturer or the hair salon involved, but that's a start, because if you've sent something that goes in the paper, you can then phone or email and say, you carried a story I did 2 weeks ago, wondered if you'd be interested in this. And that's how Sally says building those relationships is the only way you're going to get stories out, I think, rather than just going cold turkey.
I mean, I met a journalist on Thursday at an event, and she was from Business Insider, and that's a title. I've got a sort of corporate sort of client, and I find it really hard to break into that Business Insider. So I just had a coffee with this journalist at this event, and we spent 15 minutes together, but it was fantastic because she told me what she was looking for, and I told her what I could give her, and I said, and by the way, I'm not one of those pestery PRs. I'll give you stories, and I won't. And she was that'll be brilliant. And we've exchanged a few emails, and that 10 minutes that will bear fantastic fruit because we've started a relationship. She knows I'm professional, she knows I've got stories for her, and that's what she needs today. She knows I'm not a nutcase, I've got my own teeth. The journalists just want to know that you're not one of the time wasters. I said this to someone today. I said, look, your pitch was really good, it was professional, and it says I am not a time waster. And there's a difference. I mean, do you see a lot of time wasters, Christine, in your press release inbox?
Well, people just see your name, and so they immediately think that you are, a murder correspondent or a suicide or a paedophile correspondent, and they just leave you with that name. And I think and people don't follow through, or they'll send the same press release out 4 times. And that, I mean, obviously, I'm not a staff reporter, I'm just freelance. So I'm sure if you ask colleagues of ours now, they must see loads of detritus coming in. But it's not the way to sell in. The only way, and I know this is true, that you need to get hold of, a journalist on the paper. And even if you can't get hold of them, then wait, bide your time. Patience, really is a virtue. Because if you can have that single conversation or you can get that email address, then that's really the best way forward, I think.
So what I do is so say someone says to me, this is what I do, and this is the sort of magazine I want to be, and I'll buy those magazines, I'll read them. I'll find the stories and I'll write down the bylines. Now, a byline is the name of the person that wrote the story. So I'll know that, you know, Julia Smith writes about this kind of thing that my client is involved in. So I know that Julia Smith writes about this sort of thing. So I'll kind of stalk her in a sort of friendly, legal way for a few weeks. I read her articles, I look at her Twitter feed. Maybe she's done a sponsored run. I might then pitch to her and say, "Oh, I hope the sponsored run went fine. You know, I was behind you." No, I wouldn't say that, but you know, I make a point of letting the journalists know that I know who they are, I know what they write about. I've read their articles, and because I've read their articles, I'd like to tell you about, I don't know, Susan's new diet powders or whatever they are, and then you're off to a good start, aren't you? Because it's the right person, you know what they write about, you've let them know that you because some people just send these press releases to everybody. My friend's a security correspondent, you know, he's writing about war. He gets press releases about new kettles and jigsaw puzzles and all sorts of rubbish. And it's just wasting time, I think, is all this stuff is flying around. So if you've got the right target, headline, image, target, you're off to a good start. The fundamentals that have to be in place, because if they're not, your story will just evaporate, which is a shame.
It's a shame, but it's certainly, you know, it's pretty obvious. And I think possibly the people who follow you in your group are probably a little more cerebral than that and understand that you can't just send, you know, crap out, you know, because you get a reputation for it. And particularly if you're one of those people. I remember recently a woman who just on a Saturday, it was about you know, a lifestyle story, and you know, most national papers have their own go-to you know, experts, if you like, because of stories they've done previously. And I ploughed through three, one of whom was absolutely indignant to the point of being apoplectic that I was phoning her on a Saturday morning when she'd put herself up as an expert. And then somebody who said, yes, you know, I emailed, and then an automatic bounce back, I'm on leave until next week. And then somebody who did come back to me under real duress, it has to be said. And then I'd only asked for, I think it was holiday. It was the time when the airports were full, so it was like people who were how to. I think I tried Abda, and that was somebody who was walking in the park and was, you know, couldn't believe that I was ringing. And finally, I get somebody who then says, "Well, it's Saturday, and I can't believe you're ringing me now." I say, "Well, that's fine. Don't worry about it." "Well, what do you need?" Now that kind of, you know, huffy kind of, you know, princessy kind of attitude to a journalist just doesn't bode well. And then this person proceeded to write, you know, a good, I don't know, 500 words, which I hadn't asked for. And then when it didn't go in the paper because I only needed one line, and then by the time that person came back to me, you know, it had all gone and we were on to the next thing. Hounded the paper to know, you know, why weren't they being paid? And you know, what an outrageous thing to phone them. So again, I think if you are putting up people for things like that, and you know that there's a market for it, then make sure that people are primed, and you know, make sure that they are as friendly and as transparent and as happy and as enthusiastic as you are about it. Get people on side and know that you can never anticipate or preempt when they're going to be needed. So if you are going to get hold of somebody to talk about something, whether it's curlers or kittens, make sure that they're happy and that they're well briefed.
And I always say to people, you know, you've got to be a bit laid back about this, because things might go in, they might not go in. And I always say you cannot control the headline. The headline is out of your control. And then 9 times out of 10, the client will go, "I love the story. Can we change the headline?" You know, you have to accept, if you're really worried about the headline, then don't pitch, because you can't change the headline. It's because the journalist is coming up with the best headline to get the most attention. So really they're doing the story a favor. 9 times out of 10, 10 times out of 10, the headlines are fine. But some people get very sort of, I don't know, control freak and panicky about it. And you can't be a control freak when it comes to PR, because when you give your story to a journalist, you've handed over control. Isn't that right, Christine?
Mhm.
They're then in the driving seat. If you've been nice and polite and courteous and given them everything, chances are they'll be nice back. But if you start having hissy fits and being demanding and phoning, when's the story going in, that's when things can start to go wrong. So really treat them, you know, as if they've got your kitten hostage and you want it back. back. You've got to be. I am as nice as pie to people, and even if I'm secretly pissed off with a journalist, I will not show it because I need to. I need to have a relationship with them. I need to go back with them. So if I've spent a lot of time on a story and it doesn't run, I will be fair enough. I'll come to you with the next story. But not all PRs are like that. I mean, I see PRs in forums, having moaning about journalists or saying I phoned this journalist up and I did this and I'm not having this. It's throwing your toys out of the pram. It's never a good idea.
Well, and as well as that, it's a kind of symbiotic relationship that if you've been good to them, then they will phone you. It's just you realizing that a journalist may never know when is going to be a good time to phone you. So as Sally says, to get on side with somebody, don't sound huffy. I think it's a better stage if you can get that kind of very cozy relationship. Not cozy, lovey-dovey, but certainly somebody who feels, oh, they won't mind if I'm phoning at 5 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon, because I know that they're going to say, well, actually, I'm just, putting my slap on to go out to a masked ball, but hang on a minute and I'll see if I can get someone. So always making sure people have got your out of hours phone. I know that's probably teaching you to suck eggs, is a really relevant aspect of it, because we like people that aren't difficult and who are going to, as long as you know what you've got to do. If I want, 3 paragraphs on firework safety or something, and I get that, and I don't get a whole tome, then that relationship cannot help but, I'm going to say combust, can really get better because we like friendly people. And so many people in the PR industry are so as Sally says, princessy, and they're usually called Persephone and, Portia. And you've only got to have a little breathy voice on the end of the phone saying, I sent you a press release. And you think, oh my God, what can I say? So somebody who's down to earth, a down to earth approach, which I'm sure you all are. And even if you haven't trained as a journalist, pretending you have, being aware of what a journalist needs, and you're immediately going to get a journalist's heart melting in your hands.
Absolutely. There's a journalist from Mail Online who now emails me every week saying, I'm looking for some case histories. Can you help? Now, most often I can't, but I say to her, of course, I'll put a shout out on my Facebook group and I'll get in touch with my contacts. And if I have anything, I will get back to you. But the brilliant thing is now she's coming to me every week. And this is what you want, because once a journalist speaks to you and they know that you're friendly. I mean, there's another one of my clients in the group, and she got a fantastic piece in Metro. She's kind of learning everything I'm telling her, following people on X, and she's now got journalists starting to follow her because they've twigged that her content is really good and that she's in the lifestyle sphere and that she's quite creative, and they know that they can kind of, tap her up
Rely on her. Yeah.
rely on her. So that's how it goes. You've just got to, fulfill your part of the bargain, and I won't say have the meeting out of your hand, but to have journalists on side, it just makes such a difference. And once I, when I was at Today, don't remember, Christian, I used to write about relationships, which was incredible because I never had a bloody boyfriend. It was a nightmare. I was always single, but I was the relationship correspondent for some strange reason. And there was a psychotherapist at Relate. She was so helpful. She never minded me phoning her at evenings or weekends. She always knew what I wanted. She'd give me great sound bites. I never ever went to any other psychotherapist. Every time I wrote about relationships, I would phone her up and I would quote her and I would name Relate. And it was great PR for her. But I did it because she was so easy to work with. She made my life easy. I just knew there wouldn't be any problems. She never complained. So you just be that person and you will be the one that the journalist phones time and time again. It's really that simple, isn't it?
You have to build trust as well for your own sanity, I think, as well, to make sure that whatever you're delivering is going to appear. Again, I keep using this word integrity, but not to let your client down. You've got to be able to trust the journalist. If you're going to get a load of topspin, then it'll rebound on you, and you're not going to keep people on side, or more importantly, your client on side. So building trust is a really key aspect. And we're not all bad. We perhaps are slightly more like basking sharks than people would perhaps prefer to know.
Speak for yourself, Christine.
We can, well, I do a lot of crime. I do a lot of, investigations, and I think potentially, as Sally says, you go in and you disarm people. You disarm people as a journalist. You think, well, God, that overweight old woman with the grey hair. God, she's a nice woman. But at the end of the day, you have to treat, with circumspection, really, for all people you deal with, because everybody's got an idea of what they want. So don't become a casualty, and don't be frightened to stand up for the way you'd like a story to be. Once you get that relationship going, you can really start to call the shots.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say, before we close off, I wanted to know if Estelle or I think it's Safi have got any questions for us, because Christine and I, before we close, happy to answer a question or two. Are we, Christine?
Oh God, absolutely. Or if you're too embarrassed, you can always get hold of us afterwards, I'm sure. From what I've seen, that would be amazing. I think, from what I've seen, from the kind of advice that Sally's given, Brockers, as we know her.
Thank you, Christine. I'm trying to hear professional now.
Move
Brockers.
on from that. But I mean, you do have so much to give, and you've always been an absolute star and a big favourite all of your journalistic career. And I think someone like you giving advice like this is just fantastic. Everything that you've put out there is so. She spoke to some of my students at the beginning of the week, and they're still talking about her because it's just real. And that's all journalism and PR is, and it should be,
It's about people. That's all it boils down to at the end of the day. It's just about people.
Mm.
Isn't it? Christine, it's been an absolute pleasure having you. I'm really sorry to everybody who watches that and the people in the group that we couldn't make Facebook Live work, could we, Christine? We did everything. We did invites. We did, I don't know, whatever we did. We flew a blimp over. Nothing was working. So if anybody can ever enlighten us on how you can invite a guest onto a Facebook Live, because I made Christine a co-host, I invited her on. It just didn't work, did it?
No, I don't know.
No. So
doesn't matter. We're here. It's lovely to have your company,
here.
Estelle and Safi, as well. So thank you very much. And I ask regularly to go into my local BBC as a local business a bit owner, and often to give
expert opinion on social media. That's fantastic.
I think you've got to.
So if you're doing that, that's brilliant. But are you putting on your website, on your Instagram, as seen on BBC Radio? Because you should be, for a start, because you're a radio expert. So that has to be on your website, doesn't it? That's the first thing you can do, as seen on the BBC. I would have just the BBC logo, as seen on. That's really important. How can you make the most of it? When you pitch to journalists, let them know that you're doing local BBC radio, because that makes a difference, because they look at your pitch email and think, well, this woman's doing BBC local radio, she must be an expert. So use it. So you do share on your socials, and you have got your website. That's fantastic. How can I make them get more opportunities to get more paid speaking? Do you know, it might be worth you getting an agent for paid speaking, because that's how most people get paid speaking gigs, is they have an agent who finds them the speaking gig. I've got a couple of friends who've got an agent, actually. If you want to email me later, I can give you the details of the agent I know, because it's their job to find speaking gigs. Now they'll make sure you get a good fee, and they have to do that because they'll be taking 20%. So it'll save you an awful lot of time, because if you're trying to find these speaking opportunities yourself and doing your own PR and running your business, it's just going to be exhausting. So if I were you, I would get an agent for speaking. And if you DM me later, I will give you the phone number of the agent I know. He's one of my neighbours, and I've done loads of work with him, but he's got loads of famous speakers on his books, and lots of not so famous people, and people have written books, and people that swum the ocean, people done all sorts of things. So I will give you his number, because that is the best route. An agent knows where the speaking opportunities are, because they're difficult to find. You just need to speak to it. Oh, with anything, you just need to find the expert. Would you agree, Christine?
Yeah, but again, don't be too impatient to get paid. I mean, again, you've got to kiss a lot of frogs before you find Prince Charming. And I think you're probably building your reputation by getting on there. If people hear you, they will come to you. So if this is something that's quite new, then let it build. You know, we all want to get paid, but you know, free is always better. And you know, arguably, is it better to get? I do paid speaking already, but I'd love to do more. Well, the fact that you're already an expert in making sure that you get your hands on some moolah, everybody will take free. But I think, you know, don't worry if you're just setting out on something like that, to build your reputation, to build, you know, the fact that your availability is always there. And then you can perhaps talk. I say to people who are wanting to get paid for stories they send out, this really is postgraduate or, you know, undergraduate stuff, because they get so exploited, young people. And I say you just have to start off very slowly, and then you can introduce, because there's no money. I mean, I get £150 a day, which is why Sally very sensibly went into PR. I will get £150 a day for a shift for the Daily Mail. The Telegraph, I did a job for the Times last week. That's £120 a day, and there's not very much money in being freelance. But why do I love it? I love it because I can take it into the classroom as a lecturer, and it makes my life so much more interesting. I'm in fact quite boring, but the fact that I just love my job makes it easier, you know. And if you get sort of, you know, 2 of those or 3 of those or 4 of those a week, then you don't need much more than a, you know, a clean pair of knickers and a bottle of wine in the fridge. I'm very low. I'm very low budget. I know there's money in PR, but
I was before we close, I was just going to say, Estelle, that do look at newsjacking, and I won't sort of go into it, but newsjacking is, say a story breaks about teenagers and social media and new regulations. They're going to be looking for experts to speak about it. If there's a big news story that involves social media, honestly, you can bet your bottom dollar that some journalist out there is looking for a social media expert. And because these things are hitting the headlines more and more, I would make sure you always know what's in the news. You read the news sites daily. You've got your Google alerts set up for social media alerts. So next time there's a big social media story, you can then look out for any journalist alerts or pitch direct to people that write about social media. And then you'll be the person they go to the next time a story breaks. Would you agree with that, Christine?
yeah, there's something that I was looking at yesterday to do a vox pop with the students about you know, harnessing the phone use and how it impacts on young people's and all people's. How much time, I think the headline was, is how much time are you spending on your phone, and the danger it has, the real impact it has on concentration levels and attention to detail. And that's something that, you know, if you can then translate that to social media, that's a sexy topic because it's coming up for legislative changes. So you could actually probably, you know, live out on that for the next whole month and just reinvent the wheel. So yes, and being proactive when you see a story like that is a really good way of getting your voice heard.
Yeah, and I think, and Safi, I know you're disordered eating, so you need to be looking at all the Ozempic stories about West Streeting saying that anyone who's fat and unemployed has to take Ozempic, but you can be fat as long as you've got a job. That's a great story for you to jump on. So it's a question of just look out and see when your topic is in the news, because if it is, then that's when you jump and you look for the, you know, the opportunity to speak. And if something crops up in the news and you're not sure what to do, just message me in the group and I'll give you some pointers. Well, Christine, it's been absolutely fabulous. You're an absolute star. I can listen to you all night long. Obviously not on Facebook Live because that never works.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's been a joy beyond ecstasy as always. So
You.
nice to see the 2 of you here as well.
Yes,
So
thank you.
okay.
I'm just going to stop the recording before we go.